I'm just going to start off by talking generally about the intercalated BSc year. So some universities do have the BSc year and some do not. So at Imperial, it's actually mandatory to do an intercalated BSc, whereas for other universities, it's optional. And there's a huge variety for the courses that you can do for your BSc year. So this can range from some surgical specialties to medical ones. So the ones that I've heard of are gastroenterology, endocrinology, cardiology. So those are the more medical ones. And then there's some more surgical ones like surgical design and technology. So those are more scientific based, but there are more broad courses as well. So there are medical humanities, management and bioengineering, if those are things that you are interested in. So it has recently been announced that the intercalated BSc year and academic publications will not contribute to the EPM. So that stands for Educational Performance Measure for the UK Foundation Programme. So what that means is when you apply for your foundation training, usually you get a certain amount of points if you do a BSc year or if you have an academic publication. Whereas now they've announced that that will no longer count and you won't get points for it. But I would still say that there are many benefits to doing an intercalated BSc. So these include building research skills. So the skills that you learn in this year are very different to what you learn in previous years in medical school. So for example, learning how to read academic papers, learning how to do lab work and present your data, which are things that you don't do in other years. Like I said, you learn how to work in a lab. So that's something that you might do previously, but it's not something that is constantly practiced. Whereas in your BSc year, it's really focused upon. And group work as well. So personally for me, I never did group work where it contributed towards my grade. Whereas in my BSc year, there was one group project that actually contributed towards the final grade that I get. And also there's lots of opportunities outside the BSc. So it depends on what you're looking for, but there are opportunities for publication and networking as well, which I will go into in more detail. But these are just useful in your general medical career in the future, and to build a strong network helps a lot as well. So why pharmacology? So I specifically chose to do my BSc in pharmacology. So this is because you get a lot of support. So at Imperial, the module leads are really good in the fact that they make sure that students have the opportunity to ask questions, especially because the BSc year has lots of things that you wouldn't have encountered in previous years. The course structure is really well thought through. So they take on feedback that previous students have given to the module leads, and they build on that to make sure that the course has a really good structure. And there's a mix of in-person and online. So this might vary year to year and it might vary from universities. So personally for me, I had some in-person sessions and some online sessions, which worked really well for me. And then there were some things that I liked and disliked about pharmacology. So I'm going to be using the term in-course assessment or ICA. So those are the assessments that we had throughout the year, which contribute towards our final grade. So in module 1, which is in term 1, there are lots of opportunities to get guidance for the first 3 ICAs, which are in term 1. So if you want to ask your module lead about how to approach them or what's the best way to get a high grade, then they're happy to help. There were also detailed feedback sessions. So especially for the 3rd ICA or the 3rd in-course assessment, it was a write-up. So we had to present our data and we had a background, methods, result, and discussion. So these are all skills, this is a skill that's really important. So our module lead actually had a one-to-one session with each student and gave feedback on what we did well and what we could improve on. We didn't have feedback for the first 2 ICAs, which I would have appreciated more, but I appreciated the fact that they did it for the 3rd ICA. And you get a lot of practice and formatives in the first term. So what I mean by formatives is we got a lot of practice in each in-course assessment. So we get to submit a mock version of the assessment, not on the topic, but on a different topic. And then our lead gave us feedback on what we did well and how to improve the way that we write. There wasn't as much guidance in module 2 and 3, which come later in the year, so terms 2 and 3. That also depends on the actual ICAs themselves. So there wasn't as much guidance to give in the first place, but I'll go into more detail later. So generally about the course, so like I said, module 1 is in term 1, and the first assessment that we had was a written assessment, which was a letter to the editor. So what that meant was we were either given an article, or some BScs got to choose an article, and you had to read through the article, understand the results and the conclusions that they made, and then give a response to the editor. So this wasn't actually something that was published, but some BScs gave the opportunity to publish it if it was to a high quality. And it really tests your skills in how to read a paper, understand it, but also to critically appraise it. So that means finding things that they could have improved on in their methodology or the way that they've written the paper, but also good aspects as well. So things that have made their paper strong. The second task was an oral assessment. So we were given a topic and then we had to make an oral presentation about it. So because I do pharmacology, mine was about biologics and the treatment of Crohn's disease. And again, it varied from different BScs, but if you're, some of them were in person and some of them were online. So mine was online. And then the third task was an assessment of data management. So we were in labs for 2 weeks and we collected data. Then we had to analyze them and do a write-up. So like I said, a background, methods, results, and discussion and conclusion. And they tested how well we communicated our findings. Then in module 2, which was in second term, there was a group literature review. So we were assigned to different groups within our course, and we had to do a review of a field. So the field that we were given was general anesthetics, and we had to read papers surrounding that field and provide a summary of what was found within the wider literature, and also critique what was found in the literature as well. And what was a bit different to what you might have previously done with group work is that we had a peer review aspect. So what that meant was once we finished our write-up, then it got sent to another group and they had to critique what we wrote. And then there was another aspect where we gave marks to people within our group as well, and those all contributed towards our grade. And then the second task was called Science in Context. So that was when we were given a patient case to present, and we had to find literature around it. So what I had was, I had a patient, so it was a hypothetical scenario, but it was a patient who had both HIV and epilepsy. And we had to write the drugs that we would prescribe the patient, because sometimes HIV drugs and epilepsy drugs can interact with each other. So we had to read the wider literature and find drugs that would not interact with each other so that the patient could take both drugs. And then module 3 was a BSc project that took about 17 weeks. So that's what I'm currently doing. And I'll go into more detail later. So I'm going to specifically focus on the teaching style at Imperial. So in module 1, like I said, there were 3 in-course assessments, and we also had 1 week of consolidation before the deadline. So what that meant was the week before our deadline, we had no structured teaching, and we had an opportunity to just really focus on that write-up. And we also had opportunities to ask our leads or our module leads for help if we needed it. Generally, it was 2 days in person and 3 days online. But this might vary depending on which university you decide to do your BSc at, or which course you take. It really varies, but this is just the case for pharmacology at Imperial. So the way that they structured it is that they had guided online learning in the morning. So they had online modules that we had to complete individually, and then live online learning in the afternoon. So we had Zoom sessions with a course lead, and we were put into breakout rooms, and we discussed the topic that we studied in the morning, and were given tasks around it. There were also team tasks, which were in person, and Q&A sessions where once a week we were able to ask questions that we had about what was covered that week. There was also 2 weeks of practical in the first term, so that was for our third ICA. So we mainly spent our time in the labs, and we were given help as well afterwards. with how to interpret it. And we also had formative. So like I said, we get a practice of each assessment to make sure that we're on the right track. And then module 2, the group literature review and science in context were actually all online and self-guided. So this was something that I didn't know prior to second term. And again, it might vary depending on, just because it's COVID, or it was COVID, then that was the case, but it might be different later on. But the fact that it was self-guided meant that we had to really find the best way to approach the task, and it was very independent. And then module 3, we had a BSc project, which is all individual. So each student gets their own BSc project, and you get assigned a supervisor who you spend the rest of your project with. So this is a typical timetable that we had in the first term. So you can see that we had team tasks, so those were face-to-face. So there were some live online sessions, which were over Zoom, and then guided online, which we completed by ourselves, and they were online modules. So I'm going to move on to the BSc project, which is what I'm currently doing. So the BSc project is a 17-week project that you do at the end of the year. And it contributes the most towards your grade, and it's something that's individual to each student. So it depends on what you want to do your BSc project on, and there's a list of choices that each course gives. So each project will be given a title, the supervisors that run the project, a description of the project, potentially some relevant reading or important papers around the topic that you're going to be covering, and requirements. So some projects ask for students to be able to code. So there were some coding courses that some students had to complete in advance. So they ask you to rank your top choices and then try and assign you your top choice if they can. What I would recommend for that is to email your supervisor or any potential supervisors with projects that you're interested in, so that you find out more about the project if you are interested in it, and you can find out what your role is within the project. Some of them, so because I do a pharmacology degree, I initially expected all the projects to be pharmacology related, but they weren't. Some of them were in different specialties. So my project is actually endocrinology related. And also you can choose between a clinical project, a lab project, or a systematic review. So what that means is you can either be in clinics or in a hospital and collect data that way. So obviously when you're seeing patients, all that data will be anonymized. But that's how you get your data in the first place, and that's what you work with. Or you can do a lab project. So you're spending the BSc project in labs, or it can be a systematic review. So you're given a topic and you have to filter through all the articles that are surrounding that topic and write a paper on that. A few projects were actually open for publication. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would definitely have a look at that. With publication, it's important to note that it's up to the supervisor, and it's with help with the supervisor that you get to do a publication. So it's not really something that you can go and do yourself. And some projects are based around different campuses, or they can be online. So mine is completely online, but some people were based around different places in London, depending on their BSc project. So some general tips for the BSc year. I would really recommend you read the assessment briefs offered by your university, so that you know what you're working towards. So they have different requirements for each of the different grades. And what I used to do is I would look at what they're looking for and towards that, because they use as the marking. I would also learn how to read academic papers and critique them. I think that's the main thing that I learned in my BSc year. And it's a really important skill to have just generally for your medical career, just because you're constantly updating yourself in terms of what's in the general field. And being able to critique them is really important as well, just for your assessments. So you can critique the way that they've done their methods, their discussion and conclusion as well, and how it's relevant to their results. So sometimes the results that they have might be different to the way that you interpret them. So you might think that there's a certain conclusion that could be made from the results, whereas they've written something else. So that's something important to note. And it's important to look at how that specific paper contributes to existing research. So there's papers called seminal papers, which mean that they do have a large contribution and they've paved a new track in that field. So that's definitely something to learn. And then tips for the BSc project. I would definitely recommend choosing a project with a topic that you're genuinely interested in. So there is a wide variety, depending on which BSc you do, obviously. But because you're spending 17 weeks on that project, I would really recommend that you take the time to look at each of the options and what you're doing within those projects, and then to make a decision about which project to choose. I would recommend doing some pre-reading and find out where your project fits in. So some projects have previous articles where they've done similar things or the same thing, and they're just adding to it. Whereas some projects, they were quite new, which meant that there wasn't a lot in the general literature about that topic. So that's something I would look into. And it's really important to stay in good contact with your supervisor. I would say that's really important, just because those 17 weeks that you spend is very much you and your supervisor deciding what you're doing day to day and figuring out a timetable. I would also really recommend you be prompt with your work, just because the supervisor has other tasks to do. So if you do give in your work on time, so for example, if you've already started one part of your paper, then they can give you feedback on time so that you make it for the deadline. And I would also get comfortable with statistical analysis. So, you know, all your t-tests and all of that. So some projects will expect you to do your statistical analysis by yourself, and the supervisor will help you, but the project is really for you to figure out which statistical tests are important to use. And if possible, I would recommend you get involved with external opportunities, for example, publication, if that is possible. Some projects don't have that opportunity, which is fine, but it is a good thing to have as well. And then finally, I'm just going to go through some common questions that people might have. So how do you choose which BSc to take? So there are lots of options, not only at the university you might be in, but in other universities as well. So you can change universities for your BSc. So I'll definitely take time to look at all the options. And if you are interested in a specific specialty, for example, cardiology, then that might be something that you might wish to take. So I would take it in that way. Which BSc pathways are the hardest? Different BScs are harder or easy in different ways. So for example, I heard that some courses, for example, management, are a bit more time intensive than others. Whereas maybe there might be another BSc that is more humanities related, that is more essay based. So if you find that aspect more challenging, then that would be harder. But obviously it depends on what you're interested in and which ones you would enjoy as well. Is it a stressful year? I would say generally, compared to other years, I haven't found it as stressful. It's given me opportunities to really take time out of my BSc as well. So that's something that I would recommend. And what's the best thing to do to prepare for the BSc year? Definitely asking older years about which is the best BSc to take, what they did during their course, how they approached the course. I think that's a really good thing to do. And is it hard to get a first? So it really depends on the BSc that you're taking, but I would say that it's possible for anyone to get a first, as long as you really stick with, like I said, assessment briefs. If you have any queries or if you're not sure how to approach a task, then ask your module leads or your supervisor, and stay on track with deadlines as well. So that's everything. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, then feel free to ask. I've also put my email on, so you can email me anytime as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Deepika. Does anyone have any questions for Deepika? You can either unmute or put something in the chat.
And make sure to fill out the feedback forms as well. Okay, so someone's asked, is it hard to get back into continuing your medicine degree after intercalated year? So I think that's something I'm going to figure out in a month's time when I finish my BSc year. But I would say that hopefully because we do get a bit of a break between our BSc year and going back into clinical placements, that will give you time. And obviously some BSc courses are more clinically based. So it's not like you're taking a complete step out. You will still be learning about, for example, in pharmacology, I'm learning about drug interactions, which will be helpful in future years. Okay, and someone else has asked about my BSc project. So like I said, my BSc project isn't pharmacology related. It's actually about endocrinology conferences and gender equity in endocrinology conferences. So it's about whether female endocrinologists have reached equality with male endocrinologists within conferences. So like I said, it's not very relevant to my BSc, but that's something that you'll find. There's a huge variety, but it's something that I found really interesting. So what I'm doing is, like I said, it's online. So we get audio files and we analyze the language of each of the endocrinologists that are at the conference. And yeah, that's what I'm writing up about. Not all projects are like that, by the way. A lot of them are very much lab-based. Mine's just an exception. Any other questions? Okay, so what kind of options are available for topics for your projects? So off the top of my head, a lot of them are related to, so they can be related to working in a lab and working with assays, for example. So some people are working with glaucoma or Crohn's. Some people got to go into clinics and collect data with patients. So very much clinically based or lab based. And then there's also, like I said, systematic reviews. So some people were given topics, for example, Alzheimer's, and were given a database, or they were told to read around the general literature for Alzheimer's drugs. So that's just a sample of each of the types of projects that are available. There is also at Imperial, I know that there is potentially an opportunity for you to choose what project you do, so to have your own. But I would just preface that with it's a lot of work. You have to find your own supervisor, and there's a lot of back and forth with that, and a lot of application for that, just to make sure that you're on the same track as everyone else doing pre-decided BSc projects. Okay, so someone else has asked, would you do this again, or would you prefer a different topic / intercalation? So personally, I would definitely choose pharmacology again, just because when I was deciding which BSc to do, I didn't have a particular interest in a specific specialty. So for example, like cardiology or anything like that. Whereas pharmacology is very broad in the sense that you cover all the drugs within different areas. So in gastro, in cardio, in neuro, it's very broad in that sense. And like I said, with projects as well, it's very, like you have a lot of options with that, which is why I enjoyed pharmacology. There were some really interesting other BScs as well, which I did consider, for example, management, just because it's such a break from just general clinical medicine or humanities, where it's very essay based, like I said. But I do really enjoy pharmacology. And then someone else has asked, do you have any tips on getting involved in academic research during medical school without intercalating? So I think the best way to approach that is definitely if you know any, or if you have any lectures by any professors or any consultants, just to get in contact with them if there's any topic that they've talked about, or even if you go to a talk or a conference, just emailing them or talking to them at the end if there's a topic that they've discussed, which you have an interest in as well. So that's what I mean by networking as well. It's a really good way to make sure that if there is an opportunity available, that is available to you. So sometimes they do open opportunities to students. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I will, oh, someone has a question.
Okay, so any tips on how to learn to read articles and develop our critical thinking if we're not doing a BSc? Yeah, definitely. So I would say that if there's a specific topic, like I said, that you're interested in, so for example, we did one on general anesthetics, to just go into PubMed, or there's one that's called Web of Knowledge or Web of Science. And you can type in a keyword and then it will come up with the top papers and you can sort it in different ways as well. So I think that's a really good way to just read articles, and they usually have an abstract at the beginning with a very shortened version of the whole paper. And I would just read it, and it will come with practice, just reading more and more, especially around the same topic, because some papers might approach a topic in a different way, or might have a slightly different methodology. So I think that's definitely a good way to build that skill. And then someone else has asked, for the pathways or process, is there any differences in medical research projects and others other than medical? Okay, I'm not quite sure what that means. If it means like between medical projects, and then if it's something different like bioengineering or management, then they have a different way that the BSc is approached. So it's not what I've discussed in this whole talk. They have different tasks. So they don't have a research project. They'll have different, like they'll have like presentation building and other skills apart from the ones that I've talked about.
Okay, if anyone has any more questions, can you email Deepika, please? Because we need to start the next talk. But thank you so much to Deepika. That was a very informative talk. So I will now be sharing more about my experience doing basically non-intercalated research. So let me just share my screen. Can people see my screen? Yeah. Okay, great. So let me see. By the way, I'm Ruth, one of the organizing team members from NMRA. So I will share my slides. Okay, we will now start with my sharing about research outside of intercalation. This audio is pre-recorded because something horribly unforeseen happened today and I might just need to leave for a while to speak with some maintenance people. So this talk is aimed towards mid students, or really anyone looking to find research opportunities outside of their curriculum. But I would caution that this requires a lot of motivation and good time management skills, and it's a lot less structured than a BSc. So I would say that not everyone is cut out to do additional research, and you should not feel pressured to do it just because it seems like everyone else is doing it. Yeah, but nonetheless, I think it's a great way for you to find out, especially in early years, whether research is right for you and whether you want to take a whole year out to intercalate. I understand that some people here might have 6-year programs with a compulsory BSc year, but you might want to find extra chances to do research to boost your portfolio anyway. So I will run through why research is important for our careers, what to consider when approaching mentors, how to get funding or grants, how to send a good email, CV, references, and the types of questions you might get asked when interviewed by a potential mentor. So a bit more about me. I am a third-year med student at Imperial College. I am a published author. I have received some funding awards for my research, and I'm in the midst of presenting my work at some national and international conferences. But the advice I'm sharing today isn't just from me, but also the many PhDs and established researchers I've spoken to. So even if you don't want to take my word for it, you can take theirs. So why is research important? I would assume that most of you attending this talk have an intrinsic interest in research. And even if you've never tried it before, I think it's absolutely worth it to go in with an open mind and find out whether research is for you. Because the earlier you find out, the earlier you can start building up your portfolio, so that if you want to take up academic positions in the future, I would say it's a lot easier to prove your interest. For example, I know some people here who might be keen to apply for the SPF, the Specialized Foundation Program, which, for those of you who aren't aware, is a chance for foundation year doctors to take out 4 months from clinician work to do research. And you'll have to be prepared to attend an interview and demonstrate your past research experience. And if you're from the other camp of people who really want to apply to competitive specialties like surgery, then having publications and presentations on your portfolio really adds value, especially if you publish, first of all, in the area you want to go into, if you become first author, and if you present your work at national conferences. Yeah, and so as my final point says, getting your foot into research allows you to network and create more opportunities for yourself to get published and apply for even more opportunities. So it's like a stepping stone. If you want to become first or second author, you need to play a significant role in a project. And to be able to get in the first place, you must be able to demonstrate that you have the prior skills and experience. So about which mentors to approach, first of all, do you have specific research interests? I would say that most of us in the early stages of our careers may not have a specific research focus yet, but you can think about the specialties you want to go into and kind of go from there. Maybe there is a very established researcher you want to work with, although I would caution that famous labs tend to receive a lot of emails and applications from undergrads, and they tend to give priority to master's students or undergrads from their own uni. This also brings us to the next point about, is funding an issue for you? If funding is not a problem, then really you can go anywhere. Like I had a friend who did a research internship at Harvard's teaching school in Massachusetts, which looks great on your CV, and someone else who spent a summer at one of the Nobel laureate labs in Japan, which they said was an amazing experience. But I think the bottom line is that no matter which supervisor you choose, they should have a good track record of publications. So that means they publish at least a few times a year and they have recent publications, because some clinicians especially, they may have published a lot in their early career stages, but less frequently now. So keep an eye on the dates of their publications, and they should also have a good record of undergraduate mentorship. So if you know any PhDs or master's students who work with them, you should definitely have a chat with them, because they'll be able to give you an honest review of the supervisor's personality and their working style. Finally, you should also keep in mind what your level of commitment is going to be. And that brings me on to the next slide. So there are two types of mentors you can approach, either ones you know already, ones typically from your uni, or mentors who will not be familiar with who you are. For those looking to do term time research, I think it's easier for you to work with staff at your uni or hospital because you can meet them face to face and you're not limited to purely online work, which will usually end up being a lot of data analysis. And if that's your thing, fantastic. But if you want to meet someone face to face, I would say that a simple way of finding a mentor is to look your lecturers and consultants up online, see which ones have an interest in research, and just speak to them after class. And after attending this teaching series, you should have the skills required to do some basic data analysis. So you might be able to help out with analysis or some data collection. If you are looking for research exposure overseas, or you are willing to do some full-time research, then you can think about casting your net a bit wider. I will run through later some email and CV writing tips, but then again, I have to caution you that many mentors do not respond to cold call emails because they prefer someone they know already, which is why networking or having some kind of LinkedIn or ResearchGate page would be very nice. Both my mentors I approached online said that they Googled my name before arranging an interview with me. And apparently one of them saw my name on a website about hiking, and that caught his interest because he was like, hey, I like hiking too. So about funding, many organizations in the UK are quite happy to fund undergrad research, and this applies to BSc research as well. I gave some examples of funding bodies here. Some are grant bodies, so they provide you with funds to do research at any university in the UK or overseas. But there are some university-specific ones, like I know Dundee and I think Queen's Uni Belfast. They provide funds for students from any uni in the UK to come to their school to do research. But some disclaimers here. First of all, most of them only allow applications from within the UK, and the same thing goes for funding in the US as well. So you need to be from the US or from a US university to apply for funding in the US. Usually your mentor will need to be an official member of the society, so it's worth checking out each organization's website to see who the members are. Your research will need to align with the society's goals, which may or may not interest you so much, and it may or may not align with your own personal goals. And finally, if you are planning to do summer research, the stipend will cover your expenses for the summer. But if you're hoping to make additional money over the summer, that might be tough because the stipend will just be able to cover the expenses and not anything else. Okay, for those of you listening to the talk from outside the UK, there are some programs with grants open to people from all over the world, but bear in mind that these programs tend to be very competitive, so you will need to have a strong track record of research already. One of the things you can do also is to ask your mentor if they are aware of any internal sources of funding. For instance, one of my mentors was really nice because he told me that if I don't end up getting funding from grant bodies, he will arrange for a stipend for me from the university itself. Okay, I think we don't have a lot of time, so I will run through the email etiquette quickly. So please do address your researcher you want to contact by name and show them through the email that you've taken a look at their research before writing the email, because you never want to come off as if you are sending mass emails to random researchers because nobody is going to reply. Be very clear about how much time you're able to commit, because most researchers are not keen to take on undergrads for only a month, because it's going to take a lot of time and resources to train you, only for you to leave a few weeks later because you have to go back to school. So another thing also is to be clear that you have plans either to self-fund or find sources of funding, because most labs will not have enough resources to fund undergrads. If the researchers respond to your email, they will typically ask for your CV. And in fact, in your initial email, you should state that you have a CV ready to show them, because that shows that you are proactive. most people don't expect a lot from undergrad CVs, so don't feel as if you need to have a very long one. I have had the privilege of having many researchers look through my CV before sending it off to grant bodies. And I think it's always a good thing to actively ask people in the research field to look through your CV and give you personalized feedback. So some researchers and grant bodies will also ask for references. It's not very nice to a referee to hurry them for a reference when there is a tight deadline. So I would always recommend making it a habit to ask your research supervisors for a reference right after every internship, because their impression of you will still be fresh, and it's easier than having them to chase. It's easier than chasing them up over email many months later. There is also a useful tip I received from one of my supervisors that when choosing references to send to funding bodies or supervisors, pay attention to the strength of the wording. Every applicant will be sending in a positive reference about themselves, so it's all about standing out amongst the crowd. For instance, if your reference were to say something like, oh, he's a pleasant student, which is kind of meh, versus, oh, he's really passionate, he's willing to go above and beyond to get involved, that really makes a world of a difference to the overall impression they'll have of you. My final point is that references from previous research mentors and those in more senior positions, rather than any kind of extracurricular people, carry a lot more weight. Okay, and my final slide is about the interviews. So after the mentor has received all the basic information they need, if they are happy with you, they will call for an interview. My little pro tip before the interview is asking the mentor for any papers they recommend that you read, because this shows that you are proactive and have a genuine interest in their field of work. Some people might ask you things like, what skills do you have? What type of projects you're looking for? What are your aims and goals? Would you be able to carry the project on beyond your suggested time frame, especially if that's going to be a bit short? Explaining to them a bit more about your past research experiences, and if you have any plans to self-fund in the event that you don't receive any external funding. Most full-time researchers tend to be quite skeptical about med students because they feel as if we don't have as much lab time as those in other science courses, and they tend to have the impression that most of us are not so keen about entering research full-time, not so serious. And so demonstrating that you have the skills and commitment to the project is very important. Let me just drink some water. Okay, and my final point is that the interview is in equal parts to help them understand more about you as for you to understand more about them. So make sure to use the time to find out more about the lab culture, whether the person interviewing you is going to be your direct supervisor or if there's someone else, typically more junior, whom you'll be mentored by on a day-to-day basis, whether you might have the chance to talk to that person before you start the internship. I would advise not bringing up about the whole topic about publications on the first meeting, but I would say definitely find the time before the project begins to have a chat with your mentor about this so that everyone's on the same page. Okay, and before I end off, I would like to acknowledge everyone who's helped to organize the teaching series, with special thanks to the media and executive team. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or pop it in the chat. I will now go to the feedback link. So I will give some time for people to fill in the feedback form. And then if anyone has any questions, I will answer them.
Hi guys, if you don't hear me, hello. So
Hi.
I'm NMRA president, and just wanted to kind of jump in and throw up a few other tips and tricks, or just some other things to help. And yeah, I'll also give you guys a feedback link if we have it. Perfect. So yeah, I'm just gonna screen share and just show you some slides, and we can get on with just a little bit of extra information, and be happy to answer any questions you might have. So if I just jump in. Can you guys see what I'm sharing?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so basically just a kind of bit of extra tips and tricks or guidance, but fundamentally, right, if you're doing research, and particularly with us with the NMRA, we endorse a lot of kind of independent research. We strongly believe in this idea that if you're going to do it, first off, there's this kind of idea of you need to think through what exactly you want to gain out of it. So it's really important to have a bit of soul searching, a kind of very specific outcomes, what you want to get out of research. For some people, that might be kind of the specific skills they want to learn. For some people, it might be they've got a personal interest in a certain type of disease or something, and they'd like to enhance the current medical practice or care around that. For some people, it is just a case of, things that they need to kind of get out the way for their own career goals and things like that. And obviously, a big kind of thing in medicine recently is evidence-based practice. It's this idea that we use clinical guidance and the current best evidence to guide what we do in research and how we can make it as informative as possible and as personalized to the patient as possible. Because increasingly in the modern age, what you kind of see is this world where our evidence is getting better and more focused into individual pathways of drugs or patient care pathways or patients with specific diseases and comorbidities and so forth. So we're really kind of evolving into lots of different niches, and it's important to kind of go broad and then deep and eventually find what you really care about. And like I said, it's going to require some soul searching. There are no easy paths here. You've got to just go with the flow and set yourself some realistic targets, but also don't hold yourself to them too rigidly. So it's kind of a fine balancing act. Then thinking ahead, it's kind of important to bear this stuff in mind. Obviously not the core aim of why you do it, but so on the right, we've got the kind of surgical guidelines for what you'd need to get into a surgical post in the UK, and below the AFP, which is the academic foundation program. So the first academic job you can get as a postgraduate in the UK. Obviously, your mileage may vary. If you're an international student, you might find that there are other programs in other countries and things. So do check the relevant guideline for your country or wherever you'd like to apply. But as you can see, there is a clear kind of points-based system benefit to being involved with research. And if that's something that is a requirement for you or a motivation, then absolutely use it for that. And yeah, so I don't want to dwell on this too much, but the next thing I kind of want to jump into is where you'd like to start. And like I said, self-reflection, ask yourself questions of what you want to do, why you want to do it, what specifically do you want to learn, and obviously things like how much time you have, where your goals are going to take you, if there's anything specific you want to publish or learn about, or specific people you want to work with. Sometimes I've been in situations where I've seen someone deliver a lecture and I'm like, wow, that guy is very informative. They've got a lot of super specific knowledge and I'd love to learn from them. Or, I mean, just a few days ago, I read a paper from someone, it was a commentary piece, and they were talking about how not having randomized controlled trials isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes that can be okay because there's other evidence that will more than justify using a treatment. And the way that person wrote the paper was actually both incredibly informative, but also they had a very honest tone, and that was very refreshing to read. So I kind of just emailed them and I was like, I really liked reading your paper. The way you write and the content you bring is super informative. Is there any way we can collaborate? Sometimes it can be just a fluke like that and it works. So take it for what you will, and don't be hesitant to, reach out to people that you think you might work with, because often those can be the start of great partnerships. From there, obviously, once you've got an idea of what you'd like to do and how you'd like to pursue it, and you've kind of thought through the how, who, what, where, and why, then again, kind of establishing aims, making sure you know what you want to achieve, how you're going to get there, very important. So that might be a case of planning out a study, or planning out who you'd like to work with, or if you need specific funding, if you need specific things to get to where you want to be, thinking ahead and planning out everything you need is kind of the best advice we can always give you. And yeah, I think someone like Mariana can vouch from personal experience. It's super helpful to just be prospective rather than retrospective. And yeah, obviously after that, points 3, 4, and 5 are just standard practice in research. Once you've got to where you want to plan ahead, you've got what you want to study, how you're going to do it, it's just a case of execution. And that stuff comes with practice. And there's no guaranteed easy ways to do it, but just got to build up your network. You've got to kind of apply yourself. And I think for some personal tips, what I can kind of suggest to you is just the best thing you can do is read around your subjects. And just keeping on top of everything. The more you read in the areas you're looking for, you'll find things like guidelines, you'll find other, you'll find other areas of research. Often they'll mention in their own papers things like this area is understudied, and then that might be a light bulb moment for you. Or you might read a paper that describes one thing, and then you might read another paper in the same field that describes something else, and you might think, oh, hang on, I could do a systematic review and combine them and put it together. Things like that. It's kind of a case of being observational, thinking like a researcher, and trying your best to answer good clinical questions. And it all kind of fits together. And yeah, if there's any specific questions you guys have, or you want me to answer, keep putting them in the chat and I'll jump on them in like 5 minutes when I'm done. But yeah, next thing, how you can get involved. So this is the big one for me, is always create your own research projects. I think nobody talks enough about this. And I think that was kind of the motif for building something like NMRA in the first place. It's this idea that if you're a student, who says you've got to chase a grant or a scholarship or some random professor in Toronto? If you've got the passion and you've got an idea and you've got the skills to do it, give it a try for yourself. And then, let's say you do 20% of the work and you get stuck, and then you go and ask someone to help, some doctor or someone to ask them to help you. It's easy for them to help on an existing idea rather than you approaching them cold and being like, give me something to work on, because then they've got to start from scratch. They've got to work out what you're good at, how they can help you. They've got to work out where you fit into their life, whether they have the time to motivate you and get you to where you want to be. It's a big ask to go from nothing to good, healthy collaboration. Whereas if you come in with specific things, be like, right, I've done this study, this is design, I don't understand this statistic, or I don't understand how to randomize this, or I don't understand how to do this meta-analysis, or whatever it is. If you have specific questions, people will be more likely to help you because it's less work for them. Fundamentally, if you make their life easy, they'll make your life easy. Then the other things I want to kind of jump in are onboarding yourself to existing projects. Super helpful. Like I said, everyone's on this journey together. Not people will be in situations where they've done a project halfway, then they don't have enough time to finish it. They might look for some help, or maybe they're a doctor and they can't manage the workload on their own, or someone drops out of a project. Things can kind of spontaneously arise. That's where it can be quite helpful to contact them. In this kind of situation, trust is key. Absolutely, trust is key. Get to know them, get to understand what they're working on, how you might have something in common with them, and build up that relationship. And if you prove yourself as someone who can offer value to a researcher, they will offer that value right back to you, and they'll include you in stuff, they'll teach you things, they will get you to where you want to be faster. So absolutely take the time to make those bonds early, network early, and continue them. For a fact, I can tell you, I still know my first mentors in research. I still work with them to this day. And all these years later, you should continue to stay on those, because you never know where those will come back to you. You know, like, for example, you want to do a certain fellowship. One of your mentors might be like, right, I know the guy who organizes this. Do you want me to put in a good word for you? Or I know a colleague who's working on a study on this. If you're interested, I can ask them for you. It's super helpful to have trustworthy relationships and people who will uplift you to where you want to be. And that's why research groups are a big kind of thing for that, because they're people who are passionate about the same thing as you. If you're interested in neurology or whatever it is, a research group could be an easy leg up. And often there are student-based organizations that will have these connections. Like we, for example, in the NMRA, we're you know, if you wanted to work on something with us, we could probably put you in touch with the right mentors and things like that. Or we're not exempt in this case. There's plenty of others as well. So just be patient and ask around. Then a few misconceptions I would like to address. Yeah, so including yourself as a collaborator on projects, this one's a bit dicey. I personally don't agree with it, because they don't often count for full authorship in many situations. Can be a bit inconsequential for you to work on, put in effort for stuff and then not get the full reward of a writing author. It's kind of a risk to reward ratio thing you've got to weigh up. If it's valuable for you and you're getting something out of it, or you believe that this paper has a sufficient merit for you to just be a one of 200 collaborators or something, fair enough. Otherwise, again, I would think that if you want to get involved with something for yourself and kind of creating your own skills and knowledge, that might be more useful. But weigh up the pros and cons yourself and decide what is an appropriate way forward for yourself. There's no guaranteed right or wrong answers, and there's no such thing as like a this is good, this is bad. The second one, you need to contact dozens of researchers to get a project. I have done that. I think my first mentor was my 82nd cold email, so it takes a while. Hang in there. But I'm stubborn. You don't have to be. So yeah, sometimes, like I said, work with stuff yourself, find right groups, be patient, and just continue working on it. But it depends. You know, your mileage really does vary, right? It took me many dozens to get to where I was. Sometimes people get, you know, they contact one person and it works. So just don't assume you're going to have to kind of do it, but be prepared to continue working on growing your network, growing your skills, and have the confidence to try and make something out of nothing. Original research, people always get a bit confused about this. Basically, original research just means, were you the person who actually looked at the kind of primary statistical data or primary patient data? If you were involved on a paper where you saw and collected patient data for 300 people, that's probably original. If you're looking at a systematic review or a letter to the editor or something where you're abstracted away from the literature, I mean, the patients in the literature you use, probably secondary, probably not original. And timescale is a big one, because I think it's very easy to sign up for stuff or to get started with stuff and then find it difficult to see it through. So my kind of best advice to you for this situation is honesty. Like I said, you've got to kind of ask yourself these questions of, how much time do I have? What do I seek to gain out of this? What investment of my own effort and time will it take to get there? And how exactly do I achieve this, given what I know, what I can do, and who I'm working with? Honest conversations go 100 miles in this situation. So take the time to speak to people and just be like, this is what's good, this is what's bad, and this is how I can get to where I want to be. I can offer you 6 months of 10 hours a week, and then maybe the other guy might turn around and be like, no, actually, this will take 8 months. Can you do anything for those last 2 months? If you can, you can. If you can't, you can't. But if you let people know beforehand and have those open conversations, you can work out a common solution. And that will make, again, it will make them trust you more, so they'll be more likely to help you. Secondly, it will improve your own management of your life and your time, because you know what you've committed for and what you don't have to commit to. And it will also mean that you're more focused on your goals, because you know exactly how much investment is going into each thing you're working on, which is specifically helpful, again, if you're the type of person who does lots of projects at the same time. So like for me, I know if I'm spending 10 hours on this, I'm getting X result out of it. Or if I'm spending 20 hours on different paper, I know I'm going to get Y result out of it. And that helps me to navigate what's important to me and what's not important in my own kind of clinical practice versus research versus anything else that I want to do with my spare time. And yeah, that is all from me. I don't want to kind of keep you guys too long, but Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, put them in the chat or shout them out. And I'm just going to whiz through the chat and see what's here. So, okay. How do you typically fit term time research into your schedule? That is a tough one. What you have to kind of remember is that for most people, they're going to be on medicine placement or on a job or whatever, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. So you've got 40 hours to do, and then you've got other time. Often you have to just accept that you will be doing all your work for research outside of your own work time. So the best way to do that is, it's kind of planning ahead. You know, you've got to be aware of how much time it takes you to do work, how much time you need for studies, exams, family, any other commitments you may have. I happen to have a business and things like that, which I've got to manage, but I tend to do that between 9 to 5 wherever possible, because all the other businesses operate 9 to 5. So yeah, kind of your mileage will vary, and there's no shortcuts, but be patient and make sure that you have organized your time appropriately. Make sure that you know that when you have your meetings, when you've got to do stuff, plan ahead is the golden rule here. Like I said, be prospective, not retrospective. But typically for me, I end up doing maybe 20 odd hours a week of research every week, but that's split over a whole week. So it's no more than a couple hours every day, extra on weekends. That's for me how I end up working. But yeah, next question. Where can we find the recording? We will upload this to YouTube later once we finish the session. And yeah, then you can have that and kind of just watch that at your own time. Publications from before medical school counted if they are accredited publications from things from, you know, reputable journals, maybe if they've got a DI number or a PubMed, they should be fine. But I would say check with whatever association you want to count them with, and also check if they're actually, make sure that they're relevant to whatever thing you're going for. You know, if you show up with a maths paper, they probably won't like you for doing that. And is there a platform where I can reach out to researchers? Not really any proper ones that I can kind of think of. It's something that's a bit of a gap in research, because it's not really something that's been super feasible. People don't like that kind of network to do stuff, but it's, yeah, it would be cool to exist. I don't think there's any big ones. Again, with these kind of things, you have to just go with individual networks of things that you know of. So like if it's a urology group or cardiovascular research group, just find those individual groups. And I don't think they're kind of a big platform. But yeah, email people, and remember that at the end of the day, every group that you work with is fundamentally just people, right? So again, build up the trust, get to know them, they'll help you. And when you cold email someone, you have to make it clear that you want to work with research and aren't looking for monetary compensation. I mean, honestly, the rule of thumb here is make your intentions super, super clear. With me, I don't like to kind of do paid stuff. I don't prefer it because I think this is something I'm doing for my own benefit and my own skill development, and also just because I like the research. So I always kind of phrase it as a learning opportunity, because I know that I'm always learning, doing papers. It's always a rewarding experience for me. So I like to be like, listen, you're going to kind of help me learn stuff, and you're giving me opportunities to grow and become a better researcher. So I don't expect any money. I just expect you to invest to make me a better researcher. If you tell them, what you expect, how much time you can give them, what you know, what you don't know, if you have these conversations early, it's more likely you're going to be fine. And honestly, just be formal, be succinct, and be honest. Like, just tell someone like, oh, I expect to work 10 hours a week, and I expect that you will be able to support me in X, Y, and Z. Don't overcomplicate it. Making things complicated will not help you. And then, how do you make a relationship with researchers earn their trust? From the start, it can be very tricky because they don't know you. So theoretically, they don't have a reason to trust you. But the more you think about this stuff, the more you work with them, you've got to show them that you're someone they want to build with in future. So you've got to be eager, you've got to be honest, you've got to be doing good work with them. And fundamentally, you've got to have this kind of drive to improve. So as you get better and as you show them that you're willing to kind of go up with them, they'll trust you. And it is unfortunately something that just takes time and effort and consistency, but it can happen. And you just keep working on it. It's the best way to perform research online. Honestly, with the pandemic and everything, online research has never been easier. Just again, if you find research groups, find people, internationally even, just jump on a Zoom call with them. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could do a research meeting with someone just over Zoom like this, and we could probably get everything we need done to write up a paper. Obviously, there are things you need to go in person for, like data collection, or to kind of meet researchers, or like meet specific patients or whatever, but there are more and more things that can be done online. And the data kind of world is rapidly evolving, but there's no such thing as a best way to do research online. I guess it's just, you can connect yourself with more people online. So yeah, what else? I think I've run through all the questions. If there's anything else, then I think that will do. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for me. If there's any other questions, just send them into the NMRA, or last chance now. But so this is our first talk from kind of med students' experience of research. Tomorrow we'll be hosting one on the doctor's experience of research. Will be hosted by Dr. Ursula Samanuk, who is an ACF, or that kind of formal research program I showed you about in cardiac surgery at Bart's Hospital. And we'd love to have you there. And please, if you haven't done so already, do remember to fill out the feedback forms and to use the recordings to your own benefit. And if that's something that will help you, then fantastic. Otherwise, thank you all for listening. And yeah, good night.